to the Michael Smerconish program.
Refreshingly independent politics.
Exclusively on Sirius XM's POTUS, channel 124.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
So I've been called into the teacher's office, and I'm about to receive my report card. If Rachel Maddow is a minus 17.67, if Jake Tapper is a minus 15.19, Anderson Cooper's 360 program a minus 14.59, Morning Joe a minus 14.7, the New York Times a minus 7.73, the Washington Post a minus 6.76, CNN, the website, a minus 6.5. Let me go to the other end of the spectrum. The Wall Street Journal plus 4.24. Brett Baier on Fox 8.93. The New York Post, these are all plus numbers now, a 9.23. Fox News 11.58. Jesse Waters 23.73. Sean Hannity plus 24.3. Where do I fall? Well, according to Ad Fontes, and they make it their business to evaluate and rate media bias, according to them, I am a minus 1.8 for my CNN program and a minus 3.76 for the podcast. And of course, this radio program drives the podcast because the podcast consists of elements from this radio program, which brings me pretty close to a Blutarski. Because optimal for me is a 0.0, if you remember the reference. Vanessa Ortero is the CEO of Ad Fontes and joins me now. Vanessa, welcome back. You've been here before, but it has been a while. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me back, Michael.
Tell me, what is Ad Fontes, and how does a patent lawyer from Denver make it her business to rate the media?
I ask myself that question every day. At Fontes Media, we rate the news for reliability and bias. And this all started, it's hard to believe now, but about 8 years ago, that was we're in the run-up to the 2016 election. I mean, it seems like so long ago, but in the days of Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, our news media environment was still fractured, polarized. Some things were a little bit different back then. On Facebook, in particular, the news feed was where it was at in terms of arguing with your friends about politics, arguing badly with your friends about politics, left and right, and folks would share their really biased news sources with each other to try to convince each other. And it didn't work. So I created this media bias chart as a hobby because I'm a big nerd about the news. I just wanted to talk to my friends and family about how some news sources are more reliable, some are less. Some are a little left and right and middle, but some are way, way out there. And you got to be able to tell the difference. So I created this company, and it's been quite the journey over the last 8 years. Today, we rate thousands of news and information sources, including the Michael Smerconish Show.
So how large of an operation is it? How many employees does Ad Fontes have?
We have about 60. That includes most of that crew is analysts. Our analysts are they're employees that are trained by Ad Fontes Media in content analysis. We have a pretty thorough content analysis methodology, meaning we're looking at individual articles, individual episodes, literally sitting there for hours and hours watching them. And our analyst teams they're left-leaning, right-leaning, and center politically, according to
how does it work? Tests. Like, what is Let me watch the sausage being made. How is it that you go through a process and you actually come up with a bias numerical score for Rachel Maddow of negative 17.67 versus Sean Hannity at 24.3, or in my case, a negative 1.8? How do you get there?
It'd probably be helpful for your listeners for me to just explain the numerical taxonomy because those numbers
Sure.
off just reading them off might not make sense. So from top to bottom for reliability, we have a scale. It's 8 categories. You can see that chart. I'm sure you'll pull it up at some point. But it's 8 categories, and the numerical scores are 0 to 64. It might sound arbitrary, but there are really a lot of reasons why it's 0 to 64. And the same thing for the bias scale. It's numerical from -42, which is all the way left, to 0, which is middle, to +42, which is all the way right. So each individual article or episode we rate, it we before we put it on a chart, we have to get a representative sample of the news source. Some news sources, we really have to get dozens and dozens and dozens of articles before that sample is representative enough to give it like a true average score. But so we listen to several pieces of individual content or watch several individual pieces of content. And our analysts have this rubric. So this rubric looks like a blank version of this media bias chart, and it has a bunch of sub-factors for reliability. So we're looking at things like the headlines and the images. We're looking at the expression and the veracity. For bias, we're looking at things like the language used to characterize issues and opponents, the topic selection and omission, and advocacy of political positions.
So are you also, I'm so curious, are you also taking into consideration whether it, for me, for my radio program or for my CNN program, the guests that I have? Are you saying, he skews left or right in terms of the guests that he welcomes? Couple of conservatives, couple of liberals. I mean, how does that all work or factor in?
Absolutely. Now, guests are a really big piece of the content, especially when it comes to podcasts and video content. I mean, there are the format sort of varies from podcast to podcast or show to show, but there are shows where the entire show or podcast will be one guest, and the 90% of the content will be eliciting the opinions or the analysis of that guest. So the content truly is the guest in that case. Now, when you have just segments, and there's multiple guests, then you can have you can have balance between like conservative and liberal guests. And then there's also the posture of the host in relation to that guest. So imagine if you're a right leaning host, or right wing, or left leaning left wing host, and then a guest of the same political political stripe. That host might just be cheerleading and platforming that left-leaning or right-leaning opinion, and that would keep that quite far out to the right or left. Or you could have a left-leaner who's got a right-leaning guest, and they're like clashing a bit, and that will have it come to the middle. So the guest-host interaction is very instructive.
So obviously you're not always listening. It would be inconceivable that you could always be listening or watching. How much do you think you need in terms of a television program to watch, or a podcast/radio program to listen to, or a website to monitor? Like, how much is enough data where Adfontes is comfortable in assigning a score?
It depends on the format, and we can usually tell after we have like a minimum sample for each. So we'll take a look at the first, three sample episodes or 5 sample episodes of a show or a podcast, or like 15 articles or 20 articles of an outlet. And from that initial sample, we can tell, like, is most of the content from this particular source like roughly the same, or is there like a wide variation? Because there are certain shows where 3 wouldn't be nearly enough, or 5 wouldn't be nearly enough. So we have to rate like 20 or like 25 shows in order to like a really common example is Joe Rogan. I mean, he has guests from like kind of all over the map, and guests every day. So we've rated like a ton of those shows. Your show tends to be more consistent with the types of guests and the types of content that you have. So the score will after a certain sample, the score tends to stabilize for any. So what constitutes a representative sample can really vary. For news outlets, sometimes it's hundreds of articles.
Vanessa Otero, CEO of Adfontes. This is a business, right? This is a
It
for-profit
is.
business?
It is.
Okay, well, wherein lies the margin? Like, what's in it for you as a business person? I guess, look, I'm totally taken with this for obvious reasons, but who would be interested in paying for this data?
Yeah, I asked myself that question when I first started. I thought, people need this, people want this. Like, everyone comes to our website. We get so many website visitors, but in order our mission is really to rate all the news. And as you can imagine, that's a like difficult and expensive proposition.
Sure.
And like early on, I thought, okay, well, if it's a nonprofit, we could get some grant funding. But even any nonprofit like has to continue funding itself through some manner. Every organization needs to be funded in some manner. And I figured if we truly want to rate all the news, like all the formats, all the languages, like large samples, like all over the world eventually, we need to have a sustainable business model. And so we have, there consumers can pay for extra access, subscription access on our site. We have educator products for media literacy that are quite popular, especially now it's the beginning of the school year. And those are like the most visible on our website. But where we can really positively impact the media ecosystem is in the like the business of media. There's publishers and advertisers, there's a unique opportunity. Without getting into in too much detail, a lot of big brand advertisers have avoided advertising in news for the last 8 to 10 years out of concerns for brand safety. And I don't think most consumers realize the extent to which that's decimated a lot of really high quality journalism outlets, because like low quality stuff, like little blogs and like highly partisan misleading stuff, it's really cheap to make. But good journalism, like well produced analysis and opinion that's like highly reliable, is expensive to produce, and it relies on advertising dollars. So when you don't have enough advertisers, it leads to these like mass layoffs and things. So we provide our data in that advertising ecosystem to help advertisers like support the highest quality journalism out there, and that's our primary business model.
So if I'm selling widgets, I come to Adfontes and I say, hey, we want to make a buy, but we don't want to be attached to a controversial person or outlet or something that's unreliable or heavy in the bias. Consequently, give us the data. It makes total sense to me. Was that your motivation when you started the business, or did you just have a keen interest in news and bias and wondering who tacks closest to the center or the extremes?
Well, look, I really wanted to improve the media landscape.
What does that
We
mean? What do you mean improve how?
There when I first created this, like the problems that I was referring to about people fighting on Facebook, like that led to like so many real life consequences. Not just people like not getting along, like not being able to discuss politics, but like losing friends and family
Right.
over it. Our country not being able to, our politicians not being able to compromise on anything really meaningful. Like the polarization is really, really stark. And it's a function in part of the fact that we live in these what Rene DeResta calls bespoke realities. These like you can consume the same like two or three information sources that are all sort of similar to each other, and just like that's your reality, and it might be entirely different from somebody who consumes two to three news sources every day from the other side. And that's a problem. We don't have this shared we don't have a shared reality anymore, so we can't solve a lot of problems. So I wanted to be able to point like everyone in general to like look at the kind of information they consume and just have a reference. Like people can disagree with the individual placements on the chart. We get feedback all the time, like, oh, this one should be higher or lower. This one should be like more left or more right. But everybody's got their own individual sample. I wanted to point folks at like this framework, like recognize that there's stuff that's higher reliability and least bias, and you're going to be steered in a better direction with better information.
You know what occurs to me? I'm proud of my minus 1.8 score for my CNN program. I strive to get to 0.0, and I know that by your definition, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you regard as centrist, I'm not sure what your word choice is, or independent, between the sixes. Am I right? A -6 to a +6 on the bias meter?
Yeah, so we call it middle on the chart. It says middle
Middle.
or balanced bias.
Okay.
So we actually don't call it unbiased and we don't call it neutral on purpose because we don't think there's such a thing as unbiased or like truly neutral. And things can land in the middle for like at least three reasons. One, it's minimally biased, like just trying to deliver facts as straightforwardly as possible. Two, centrist. Like so things centrism is a bias too, it's not it's advocacy of like center political positions, or it can be in the middle because it's biased, like as a balance because it's showing two or more sides of an issue, and so you'll notice that there's stuff that's in the middle that's like kind of low. So like middle by itself isn't necessarily the best. You've heard me say this before, but middle and high, there's a high correlation between things that are in the middle of high reliability.
Here's what I was going to say. First of all, the company that I keep, according to you, the likes of David Muir and Nora O'Donnell, which I like. I'm proud of my Ad Fontes report card. I feel like I'm having a student teacher, right, conference right now. But it occurs to me that where I look at Hannity at a plus 24.3 or Maddow at minus 17.67, they're probably equally proud of where they are. I mean, I think if you gave Sean Hannity a score that was akin to mine, he'd be embarrassed, and perhaps Rachel Maddow, the same thing. I mean, I'm striving for something different than I believe they are striving for. Any reaction on your part? We don't all want to be perceived as a centrist or as an independent or in the middle. I wish we did.
Right. And, there's nothing inherently wrong with, liberal or conservative moral foundations. The things that, when I interview analysts, and one of my favorite questions, because we have to ask about their political leanings, is what makes you proud to be liberal, proud to be conservative? And you know what? They always tell me something that's like that represents like the best of them, like they love their families or they they care for others. Folks that are like they get scores pretty far out on the left and right, and especially like low on the reliability scale. Most of them are like not super happy about it and not proud of that. Like most folks think that they're like, well, I'm fighting for what I think is right. Like, sure, it's a little left or right, but it should be higher. Like, it should be a little bit more to the middle. Everyone thinks that their score, if they're kind of far out there, most people don't think that they're the bad guy. They're not like, yes, I'm trying to destroy democracy. Folks are, they think they're advocating for what they think is right.
In the media world in which we live, frankly, some of your scores at the extremes, they get you hired. It's a hell of a lot more, honest to God, it's a lot more difficult if your politics are more akin to mine and you're trying to survive in this world. I want to make sure, because I know my audience, and I know that they will be really interested in by the way, the name, where does it come from? It's Latin for what?
It's Latin for to the fountain, literally, but to the source, figuratively.
To the source.
So we're looking at the actual source. It's a call to action that was used in the Renaissance and Reformation times, both times where folks were struggling to find what was true, and in each case the answer was go back to the source, go back to the texts.
So I want people to go to your website if they're interested in learning more about the whole process, which is Adfontes, ADFONTES media.com. Can I see my file?
Yeah, absolutely.
Seriously? So,
What do you want to see?
no, I'm just curious. Like, I'd be curious to know what went into. I don't mean at this moment. I just mean like,
Oh, totally.
so it's transparent.
Oh, yeah. So on the chart, you'll see the individual dots that will link to the shows that we rated. So you see which ones.
Okay.
And like we give the publishers, like the news outlets, actual notes on them, because our analysts, like it's a really unwieldy to like publish all of our analyst notes, but we have the, like, what are the sentences, like what were the guests, what did they say, like if something,
Oh, I gotta
people
get
ask,
into
well, what's the
that.
difference between factor analysis? It's like, well, fact density, like the asking questions to elicit analysis, asking questions to elicit opinion, those will, make a more analysis or opinion.
Is there anything I can do for extra credit? Meaning tether toward, can I submit something as I try and bring my score down to a zero? One final question. So I'm at minus 1.8. Is anyone closer to a zero? Who in your research is a zero? Anybody?
As like an individual like podcast host, I'd have to look it up.
How about media
But
outlet?
we have, oh yeah, a lot of local stuff.
Oh,
A lot
okay.
of local
Okay.
news. It's
Okay.
like right on the middle. Look, if outlets that do like just fact reporting, it's, folks might not find that to be like the most entertaining, but it is the most reliable for information.
Sure. Yeah.
Just reporting the facts as minimally biased as possible, with like no characterizations. That's a reason local news is so trusted still, because that format lends itself
Makes
to
sense.
To no
Vanessa,
minimal bias.
that was great, really informative, and I'm sure people are taking away a lot. So thank you very much. Until you rate me next year, we'll do this again, I hope.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Vanessa Ortero is the CEO of Adfontes online, adfontesmedia.com. Call me now. You know the number. Let's talk about some of the scoring that you've just heard. I'm here to defend my own. So I'm at 855-486-1.